What up, everybody? JP Finlay, Redskins Talk Podcast, as always, brought to you by Oarsman Automotive of Virginia. We ride with them, want you to do the exact same thing. These are obviously crazy times in our country. First, we had the coronavirus. Now, really, from sea to shining sea, we're dealing with the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Just a true tragedy that is affecting people all across the country and impacting ways that I don't think any of us really saw coming. It's terrible. It's sad. We are going to dive into that. Our good friend Kim Martin, who is now at ESPN, had a really good perspective on a lot of this. So we sat down and talked with her, and then Mitch, Pete, and I will reflect on everything on the back end. Also, plenty of football discussion. We talked about Dwayne Haskins, Ron Rivera, what constitutes a good year for the Redskins in 2020, what are fair expectations for Chase Young. Let's dive into all of that. Again, this is Redskins Talk Podcast, brought to you by Oarsman Automotive of Virginia. Always, always, always a big-time honor to have our good friend and now ESPN national football reporter, I hope I got that title right, Miss Kimberley Martin, joining us on the podcast yet again. Kim, how are you? Congrats on the new gig. I already saw you on SportsCenter with Kirk Cousins doing your thing. I hope all is well.
Yeah, doing good in Jersey. So the COVID scare here has been intense, but family's good, knock on wood. And you mentioned the SportsCenter piece. Obviously, my first one would have to have some sort of Redskins tie. I couldn't, it just had to play out like that.
Of course. Let's start. We talked about this a little bit to open the podcast. You mentioned the COVID and coronavirus, and the country was already on edge, on the brink, really, with that. And then you have this situation in Minnesota with just the tragic murder of George Floyd and everything that's kind of been set off from there. And, you know, I make a very loud point about sticking to sports, and I support like crazy all of my colleagues and other journalists that don't want to. But I think this thing has even brought me past a point where, to me, this is maybe it's become political, but at the root of this is just a incredibly depressing problem in our country that everybody has to realize, recognize, and start to stand up to. I'm curious, in your work, kind of what the impact has been just in your world beyond work wise. I mean, this is everything. It's not, you can't pigeonhole this stuff.
Yeah, I think right now, and as far as how I feel, I think as a Black woman in America, you kind of feel you're tired and exhausted and sad and angry, not just because of the tragic death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, but Ahmaud Arbery. There was several weeks that went by before the video even surfaced. Breonna Taylor, she has sort of gotten lost she's sort of gotten lost in all this too. But I think because I've been really fascinated by this being a tipping point for people, because from my vantage point, these are the same issues. These images are things that we've seen before, at least I've seen before, and I have taken to heart. I think when the conversations I've had with players, the conversation I've had with friends, a lot of us see ourselves when we see these images, because you see another Black person in this situation and you immediately feel like that could be me, or that could be my father, or that could be my brother or my cousin. And I speak from a place of, listen, my husband's white, my brother-in-law is a cop, I've got cops in my family, I've got military people in my family. So I get frustrated when people think that the anger is because, oh, like she's just making this a big deal, or people like her just like talking about stuff that's not that important, or she should stick to sports. I understand why we sometimes feel like we want to stick to what happens between the white lines. However, I think people have to understand that sports and politics have merged many times, that sports usually is the icebreaker and the conversation starter for a lot of issues. COVID, I started at ESPN literally the week that the NBA shut down. So the fact that it took the NBA it took an NBA player, took a league to shut down for actual Americans to be like, oh shoot, this is kind of a big deal. Like, okay, maybe we need to rethink this. Like, that says a lot about the importance of sports and the impact that sports have and the platform that athletes have. So in my conversations with them, in months prior, in the past few days, a lot of them feel angry and frustrated, but also that, okay, now we have more people speaking out. Now we have more people feeling like, I see what people have been saying and I want to help. And now how can we go about actually putting action together?
And that's the hardest part, right? Is to put action together. And you mentioned the word tipping point, and I think that's so true. And I think just because of the egregious nature of Floyd's murder, I mean, I can't get past the 8 minutes aspect of this. It blows my mind that this was not a spontaneous, like pulling a trigger takes a quarter of a second. You're talking about 8 minutes. It's just an entirely different situation. But I think, and listen, you are incredibly dialed in around the NFL. You know the Redskins organization. You know the new players, the old players, everybody. I want to talk about that. But I do want to come back one more. I've been talking with John Keim, trying to figure out ways that we as a Redskins beat can actually do something. I think it's so vital to actually do something rather than everybody be appalled for a week or 2 weeks. And this is a big national conversation and then it goes away. What would you, Kim Martin, encourage people to do? And that can be just people listening to podcasts, people that go to football games, people that are football fans, just everybody. How do we make this thing actually move forward?
I would first start with thinking about the conversations that you have with people that look like you. I would encourage people not to be afraid and sensitive and to be discouraged by words such as race or police. You know, a lot of the statements I've seen from corporations and the NFL and leagues, you know, there's certain keywords that are missing, you know, Black, race, racism, police brutality. And so those are the key issues. Now, I tweeted this a little while ago, 4 years ago when we saw the Kaepernick stuff. I think his message got diluted in a nationwide conversation about the military and patriotism. Sure. When the same issues he was talking about then are the issues that these players like Josh Norman or Demario Davis or Malcolm Jenkins and Eric Reed and Kenny Stills and Anquan Bolden it's the same topics. So I use the word tipping point because it does feel like that. But for me, from my seat, it feels like we've come full circle. From 4 years ago, it seems like we're in the same spot. I thought Ferguson would be a tipping point, and it in some respects was and was not. So I think as far as a beat or as far as people who want to do things, I think honestly, I did a podcast yesterday with my former Yahoo colleague, Amanda Borges, and I said, start with the internet. Seriously, like you could literally Google anti-racism resources, and there are books, there are podcasts, there are funds that you can donate to if that's what you want to do. I think everybody has to decide, is the action that I'm taking, is it going to be talking to my friend, my uncle, my dad, my mom, my brother, my sister, who may have prejudiced views or racist views, or you hear them, you know, in that moment, if they say something that strikes you as like, that's kind of messed up. Do you challenge them in that moment? That's a form of action. Talking to your kids. And I don't mean specifically you, I know you have small children, but there are people that, you know, wonder, when is it time to talk to my kids? I think we can't be blind to the atrocities of the world, but we also have to have conversations in a way that we're not scaring children into thinking that everybody's awful. But, you know, if you have older kids and we can't, because of COVID, we're all at home. We are all at home watching the TV. We can't escape it. And in some ways, I think I need people to understand that for me, like just because I turn the TV off, those images still stay with me because I feel that connection as seeing somebody who looks like me. So while
Sure.
it feels like I just need a break, I need to get away, understand that people of color are not able to do that in the same way. So athletes, they're in that same position right now of feeling angry and numb and just burnt out. But there are lots of funds that you can donate to. There are lots of, like, you can have those conversations in your home. You can go and volunteer. You can support, you can, on this podcast, you can think about like, okay, how many women, how many guests of color, how many, people who don't look exactly like me can I have on this show? I think it just requires legwork from all of us. And we all have a different path that we're going to take with the action. But as long as we do something, I think that's the goal.
It's really interesting you say that, because I have 2 young daughters, and that has kind of recalibrated a lot of how I think about stuff. Like even just simple stuff. Like I remember 2 years ago or whatever, that it was always referred to as the Women's World Cup. And I was like, why isn't it just the World Cup? Like they're not running concurrently. You don't have to divide up between this World Cup and the women, just stuff like that. And then talking to my daughter about it, she's almost 5. Like she can process what's going on in the world, and you can't ignore it, to your point, but they're not going to handle, she also can't handle everything. But the biggest key, I mean, this is maybe silly, I don't know, but we have, there's a series of books that are like young heroes. I can't remember what they're called, but we have this package of books, and it's Albert Einstein, Abraham Lincoln, and we have a Jackie Robinson one. And so it's I Am Jackie Robinson. It's like a little kid version of Jackie Robinson telling his life story. And we've read that each of the past couple of days, and it's simple enough that she can understand it, and just seems topical and important to try to continue to move things forward. And I'm going to transition us to the NFL here, because Mitch, I know, wanted to talk about just what the league's trying to do with the go ahead, big man. I don't want, you got the question lined up.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to move toward, locally we have Ron Rivera, obviously, as the Redskins head coach. He's one of 3 in the NFL. We had him on the podcast in March at the Combine talking about, his women and minority panel that he sits on. We've seen some of that action and, the hiring of Jennifer King and others. How important is it, with what Ron is doing with the landscape that we know is in the NFL?
It's huge. It's huge because, again, that's the action. I understand that not everybody may have access to the same opportunities, but when I'm able to, I can help open the door for somebody. I can help give somebody a path to where they might want to go. It's the same thing that you see with Bruce Arians. You see the 49ers do a great job as well. It's not just saying that diversity is important. It's about who are you hiring, and you bring up the NFL, and like that's a big question for the NFL as well. So somebody like Ron Rivera, who is committed to helping women, because he understands that the playing field isn't always even. He understands that the criticisms are going to be far greater for women trying to break into the NFL. And if he can be a resource to them, like Jennifer King and others, I think that's one way that you use your platform and send a message without even having to say anything.
I think you've touched on a lot of really valuable things. Just to maybe close out this part of the pod, I mean, you've mentioned tipping point a couple of times, but then you said it feels like we're in a circle from 4 years ago. So in 10 years or so, do you think when people look back at this event and at 2020, they'll say that really was the flashpoint and people really got the idea to unite and be better? Or are you going to think, man, something's going to happen in 2030 and you're going to be looking back and said, yep, just keeps on piling up? What gives you hope that this could be really the difference maker? Or maybe what gives you a doubt that this is the difference maker?
what gives me hope is that more people who don't look like me are using whatever platforms they may have, whether they be big or small, from somebody like Tom Brady adding his name to a Players Coalition letter for a federal investigation into the Ahmaud Arbery death, or somebody like Carson Wentz and Zach Ertz, and even somebody like Joe Burrow, who is a rookie. He hasn't even, played an NFL game, and he's speaking up and trying to show leadership and trying to use his platform to express his feelings and support for people who don't look like him. That gives me hope. What makes me discouraged is because this isn't new none of this is new to me. These are things that I think about constantly. So it's a tipping point in that more eyes are on it. And I think because we're home because of COVID, and we're forced to see these images, and maybe it feels awful, but maybe it's not such a bad thing to actually witness and see what's happening. But we've seen it before. The civil rights movement wasn't that long ago, and I think people think that they believe that we're in this post-racial society, and so that to me is a fallacy. So that makes me worried that this will just be one of those moments people are excited to do something, and then that excitement sort of fizzles and we move on to another tragedy not too far away.
So everybody go follow by Kimberley A is her Twitter handle. There's a lot of really smart stuff there. I mean, Kmart, seriously, you were the first person I thought of to try to bring on to discuss this because of a mix of thoughtfulness and realism and seeing all the different angles. And so I appreciate that. But at the same time, I also just want to talk to you about football because you know a lot. And for the Redskins in 2020, everything hinges on Dwayne Haskins. And it's oddly the poor guy's 23 years old, but it's kind of a make or break year because if he's terrible and they're terrible, they're going to draft another quarterback, or they're going to, who knows if Cam Newton's healthy in 2021, what Ron will do, or if Alex Smith's healthy. A million things could change. I'm on the record. If Dwayne was a stock right now, I'd be buying it. I think he is underappreciated for the talent he has. I think the kid can play. I think 2020 could still be ugly, but show a lot of potential. I'm curious where you are, if you've talked to him, folks around the league, where are you on Haskins 2020?
I think the frustrating thing for Haskins is you can't even really evaluate him properly if you're being objective, because the kid came into a system where the coaching staff didn't want him. Let's be honest, that was a staff make or break. And so to take a guy that is a project, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but just a guy who's going to need some time to develop. Well, Jay and company didn't have time to spare, and they were right because they're not here. So now Dwayne is gone. This is now his second offense he's got to learn. And guess what? Now we're in the midst of a pandemic. So nobody's in the facility. All these virtual meetings are being had. He's trying to show coaches that, yes, I'm keeping up. But really, none of that matters until you see him on the field. And, Kyle Allen has a great advantage here. He's the backup, but he has relationships with Rivera, with Scott Turner. That bodes well for him. I personally think Dwayne has a lot of talent, but we've seen a lot of QBs, talented QBs, who have been put in less than desirable situations, sort of fizzle and flounder. And you wonder, had the situation been different, had they not had 2 different coordinators or 3 different coordinators or head coaches, how their development would go. I think for Rivera and company, they have to invest in Dwayne and make 2020 about him, because he's already he's again starting behind the 8 ball, just because he just hasn't had any real time to develop, and this whole offseason is a wash. And I know guys are working. I know they're working, but it's just so different right now. So I agree with you as far as the talent goes. I think this is a critical year for him, but I think he'll be judged unfairly because the situation just is not favorable.
He should be graded on a curve, but there's no curve in the NFL.
There's no curve because you don't have time. You don't have time. Because if he doesn't put it together, if he falters and you have Kyle Allen as a backup and he does well, or both of them stink this year, you expect Ron Rivera to go out and get a guy. You expect the fans to be like, you know what, seen enough. And you understand why, but there also are mitigating factors as well.
You talked about the virtual offseason and Ron Rivera, Scott Turner coming in. How do you think Dwayne will thrive in this offense?
Well, I think the fact that this is a new season, new coaching staff, obviously, I think Ron Rivera we're going to see an improved defense, and that in turn will help the offense as well. I think going into this year, at least from talking to people and what I've read, Dwayne Haskins is the guy, right? So you expect Ron to put him in a situation to succeed, to scheme an offense, for Scott Turner to scheme an offense that suits his strengths. Terry McLaurin, everybody expects this kid to ball out. I think he's been a bright spot in the craziness of Redskins life, he's been a bright spot. You've got tons of running backs. Who will be RB1 and 2?
Plenty of quantity.
Remains to be seen. Yes, but again, if training camp, if this were a normal off season, you go to camp and you're like, all right, guys, show us what you got. When training camp begins, we'll see. Everything is gonna, like, all these rookies, all these young players, everything's gonna be sped up this off season. So I think Dwayne can succeed, but everybody from Chase, like all the new pieces, there are going to be some growing pains. And I think fans have to understand that because these are unusual times that we're in.
You have the unique perspective of covering the team with the Post and then kind of going national. So I think maybe you more than a lot of national.
She didn't she did.
Oh,
yeah, she is.
Yes, super national. So you understand, like, I don't know how to phrase this. Do you think the acquisition of Ron Rivera and losing Bruce Allen, like on a national scale, it may look like, all right, the Redskins changed the guy in the front office and they brought in a pretty good head coach. But locally, it feels like they got rid of the worst person ever, and then they brought in Ron Rivera, who seems super competent. So, like, do you think on a national scale, people are maybe, I don't know, underestimating how those changes could impact the Redskins because they just don't know how bad it was locally?
Oh, no, I think everybody knows how bad it was. In Ashford. I think you don't have to worry about that. No, yeah. I think if you are in the DC metro area, the DMV, like, you have the Fire Bruce Allen, tweets and everything. You guys have been inundated for years with wanting him gone. So nationally, I think people understand, okay, Bruce Allen was not well liked, well respected as far as from the fan base, and thinking he was leading the team in the wrong direction. So now it's a clean slate. And I think nationally, you have it from the outside. You have a guy like Ron Rivera who has it as a fresh slate. He was the first coach last season. So he got as far as saying, okay, I know that I'm going to the Redskins. Dan in lockstep, we're one accord. This we want to take this team. So that and encouraging. But I mean, I think really it does.
Oh.
We're having some technical trouble. There she is. Kmart, you're back.
I'm here, but hello.
You're good. I tell you what, I think we understood your answer there, just that nationally people realize how screwed up it was, but locally it's going to be a bigger deal. You've taken up too much of your time. You've been very gracious. This will be our last question, or my last question anyway. 2020 is a good season for the Redskins and it's open-ended, and I don't think the answer needs to be a Super Bowl. But what makes 2020 a good year for the Skins?
Oh, if Dwayne Haskins, if he just takes the necessary steps, if he goes out and commands an offense and is able to bring the team back in tight games and when there's a deficit, if he's able to at least show you that he's a qualified, competent, talented quarterback, and there are no doubts about his ceiling, I think that's great. It doesn't have to reflect in the win-loss column, but you just want to see that growth, that maturity, that playmaking on the field.
I totally agree. Also, Chase Young is going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. These two are scared to say that because they've got such bad Ashburn syndrome.
No. It's not scared to say it.
Not scared to say it.
It's not scared to say it. JP's point was that Chase Young's season is not a success unless he is Defensive Player of the Year.
It's not what I said.
That's different. That's different.
Isn't it okay to have really high expectations for Chase Young? Because I think most people are like, oh, well, we just want him to have a good year. It doesn't have to be about double-digit sacks. Like, this dude is supposed to be Khalil Mack. He's supposed to be Von Miller. It's okay to have high expectations.
It's okay, but he also is a rookie. So, if he does not win Defensive Rookie of the Year, that doesn't mean the season is a bust for Chase Young.
See, this is what the media does.
This is what the media does. Yeah, no, you see how you guys are?
You are the national media.
You prop up these players, and then when they don't meet your lofty benchmarks, you want to kick the pedestal out from under them. I will not stand for it, JP.
There's so many things I would say if we weren't being recorded about where that comes from. But I'll say this. Chase Young's goal is to break Javon Curse's rookie sack record. So I'll just let him do the talking.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's
let him do the talking.
Yes, please.
Between Kimberly's Chase Young takes and her Oreo takes, me and her are in lockstep. I'm in.
The Oreo cupcake cake in general, not liking icing. Luckily, we've overcome, but that is something that the Oreo takes and the birthday celebrations that last 6 weeks and span multiple years are something that I was not prepared for when we entered into our friendship. But Kmart, we appreciate you sincerely and congrats on the new gig.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. All right. Again, want to thank Kim for coming on. Follow her on Twitter, by Kimberley A. She's super smart. She's super dialed in across the league, does really good written content, video content, all that good stuff. So check Kim out. Gentlemen, we can talk anything. The way you guys are trying to frame me on this Chase Young stuff is completely erroneous.
It's ironic.
All I'm saying is the kid's a superstar, and that should be the expectation. That doesn't mean he has to break Javon Curse's rookie sack record, but it's okay to have high expectations. This happened with RG3, that when he was really good at first, fans were nervous because they're like, oh, well, nothing good ever happens here. So Skins fans are doing that in advance with Chase Young. It's okay. He's great. You're sitting next to a pretty girl, Redskins fans. Embrace it.
It's framed that way, JP, because the first time that it got brought up was we did an open-ended Chase Young's rookie season will be successful if, and your answer was if he wins Rookie of the Year. My point was that
your answer was if they're better, which was the worst answer I've ever heard.
My point is that he can have a successful season without winning Rookie of the Year.
I agree with that.
It's the 200 yards debate, except now it's on defense with Chase Young, and they're both dumb, and I'm tired of both of them. Chase Young's going to be great for a decade. I understand that. That's all I care about.
You just hope they're better, Pete? Just a generic, I hope they're better.
My answer was, as long as he stays healthy. And you hated that answer too, but didn't listen to my explanation, which is fine because you never really listen to my explanations.
I often listen to your explanation.
Pete, like a report
that's
card.
true.
It's like a report card for like a third grader. It's not always, but often, which means like it's a B.
I think it's like an S for satisfactory.
Yeah, satisfactory.
I was going to say it's a check, not a check plus.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, Pete, I listen to you 95% of the time, and a solid 20% of that time, you kind of make a fool out of yourself.
Yeah.
What was the last one that you didn't understand? Arizona was on Pacific time or something?
Yeah, I said we could like stay out later because the game will be at 4:00 when really that's just the time would be on Eastern time. Of course, it's still at 1:00 in Arizona. So that was really pathetic.
You confused St. Louis and Green Bay geographically.
Yeah, no, you're right about the 20%. It might even be higher, but
all right. Mitch, I know you wanted to say something. You go ahead, Mitch. So let me say this to all our folks that don't. I think you can have a conversation about what happened in Minnesota without it being political. And that is our focus. There are no lines being drawn, no sides being taken, except for the side of right and wrong. And what happened in Minnesota was 1,000,000% wrong. So that's why I make a strong point of not doing politics. And I think a big part of that is being in DC and I am sure that people from both sides of I know people from both sides of the political aisle listen to this podcast. We love them for that and try to create a community that frankly is a diversion from all of that stuff. This though is not that stuff. It may have become and probably will continue to, but we're talking about what happened in Minnesota and the reaction across our country. So Mitch, something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I've struggled with this over the past couple of days because there's a lot that I want to say. To me, it's not a political thing. It's humanity. It's life. And so I kind of jotted down some thoughts, and it starts with the reality that the African American community lives in fear and anxiety over racial discrimination and an opportunity is entirely unacceptable. What's happening in these communities isn't right, and just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Think about how far I would need to be pushed, or you guys would, to feel that you're at your last resort, that your only way to make your voice heard is to stand in the streets and protest, and understand that this is where the African American community is and has been. I don't have the answers, and I don't know that I have the right words to express how I feel. And it's been kind of an intense burden on my conscience that I have this medium and that I have this opportunity, and I still can't really come up with the right words. But it's not about me, I guess. It's about inhumanity and inequality. It's about a disgustingly long list of men and women, African American, mistreated and cast aside by a system that allows us to do so. None of us want violence, but for far too long, marginalized voices haven't been heard. And if you're concerned about looters, then don't give them a forum to hide. Let's find a way to fix the root problem so people don't feel the need to be pushed to this point. It's not just about the murder of George Floyd or any countless others. It's about equal opportunity and equal treatment. If you look at our narrow world of the NFL, there are no African-American owners, 2 minority general managers, and 3 head coaches. It's not good enough in this industry, and it's not representative of football. But this world of football has brought us all together. I don't know what fixes it, but for us to affect change, it requires effort, engagement, and action. And whatever small part I can play in it, I'm invested.
All right. Pete, was there anything you wanted to say, man?
Yeah, I mean, we've all been reading things and listening to things just to kind of broaden our scope. And the thing that resonated with me a lot, and it's going to sound weird because it came from Josh McCown, who's a white person, and people say, how can you take away, how can one of your biggest takeaways come from a white guy? But he's talked to players and he's come away with this analogy, and he said that he realized that the black community basically wakes up every morning with a weighted vest on, and the white community just wakes up and has nothing on. So like the moment they get out of bed, the black community feels like they're already behind, and the stats bear that out, and the issues they face bear that out. So I think if you're kind of struggling as a white person who can't put yourself in these shoes, think about that every morning you wake up and you can just go about your day, and not everybody can really feel that way. So just realize that you have luck and privilege and fortune things in your side that you probably aren't even aware of, and try to be more aware of those things.
This is how we'll end it. I don't know if you guys know Scooter Monroe. He played football at University of Maryland, was a wide receiver. I'm friends with him. We were at college at the same time. And he's been really outspoken about everything going on. And I did a screen grab of one of his Instagram stories. You can follow him if you want at SC. So it'd be Scooterp25, SCOOTERP25. He said, "This is a complicated issue. There are countless problems and byproducts that must be addressed, but make no mistake, this is the root of the problem. Our foundation is fractured. Let's fix it together. God bless." There's a lot more there if you want to go follow, but I think ultimately less is more on this. There's things I don't understand about the problems and the weight of all this that I frankly can't. And you try to be understanding and help move things forward. I think that's enough. We'll be back to kind of our usual, I hope actually, we'll be back to kind of normal programming for our next podcast. I hope that folks can listen to this with an open mind, and I'm sure we'll get some feedback that's positive, and I'm sure we'll get some feedback that's negative, but that's life. If you made it this far, thank you very much for listening. And let's all just try to be civil to one another and move forward and make the world a slightly better place. If we all do that, then the world will be a better place.